Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. This is In Conservation With, sponsored by Leica Sport Optic, as well as King's Place Music Foundation, which is part of their Nature Unwrapped season. And thank you guys for making this possible. My name is David Lindo. I'm also known as the Urban Birder. Today, I have a very special guest as far as I'm concerned. He's a man that I've known for some time. We've become close buddies now over the period of years we've known each other. Joel Ashton, good evening, and how are you? And where are you?
Great. Well, yes, I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, slight last year, bit of mayhem trying to get a few projects finished off before Christmas, as is always the way, but nothing new. Where am I? I am actually in a slightly vaulted ceiling in North Yorkshire, actually. I'm just on the south side of the North Yorkshire moors. And funnily enough, anybody who follows me on YouTube, Wild Your Garden with Joel Ashton, I have just posted a video on the very project that I'm about to start work on, or have been working on today and through the rest of the week, which is some nice coppice management. Yeah, and I stayed in this house 5 years ago when I first did the project. So yeah, bit of reminiscing. Remember this room well. So had a bit of liquor paint, a few pictures, but yeah, it's a nice place. I mean, Kirby Moorside, for those of you that know Yorkshire, and fabulous scenery around here, as I say, just south side of the North Yorkshire moors. And yeah, what a place it is. It's a good spot for birds as well, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Now, can you remind the Zoomers as to your first ever time you stuck a spade or a fork into the ground and thought, you know what, I can do something with this?
I don't know. You'd have to ask my mum and dad, I think, on one story, because there's actually a photo of me with a spade at about 4. But I think it was probably when we dug our first wildlife pond with Dad, which was, God, some moons ago now. Yeah, probably about 20 odd years ago anyway. And yeah, I just remember that sort of getting the pond in the fiberglass pond, getting it in the ground, and yeah, watching the newts turn up and the birds turn up. Even had a kingfisher right in the middle of town in South Lincolnshire. Kingfisher turned up on the fence one day. I was absolutely just blown away at that. But yeah, I think that was for me the first time I thought, wow, we've made little habitat and here's all this life. And I used to sort of lift up the bits of the sort of flaps of turf over the edge, if you like, and look for all the smooth newts in the edges and try and catch a few. And yeah, good times. I'm sure many of us can relate to an early life pond memory, I'm sure, that sort of kick-started a wildlife interest, I'm sure.
Well, I must admit, and I think you know this already, Joel, me and gardening don't really mix. I mean, for example, I've been stuck in lockdown early this year in Spain, and I did a few films from the terrace that I've got on top of this apartment, which is all lovely. Well, it wasn't, because a lot of people said, well, look at the state of your terrace. Why have you grown some plants on this? And I was thinking,
You've got to do something about that as soon as lockdown lifts. I'm coming out there to give your terrace a revamp.
But how do you feel, when you've actually, I mean, you can talk us through something tonight, but I mean, when you actually work in a job and you go there and it's a wreck or whatever, and you end up sort of with something that can grow into something amazing, how does that make you feel?
It's just brilliant. I think the best thing, though, is hearing back from the customers, whether it's a month later, 6 months later, or a year later. And funnily enough, quite often I get a flurry of emails, usually around sort of May time, with 4 or 5 pictures of the really big blue broad-bodied chaser dragonflies, usually on one of the dragonfly perches that I'll put in the pond. And it's those sort of incidents for me that are the real sort of highlight, because it just reminds me of how much interest there is then from the customer or the client, who quite often become friends, of course, afterwards. But to know that these habitats are having a positive effect, and of course changing people's lives. They're using parts of the garden or seeing the garden then as a space that they wouldn't have seen before. Because of course a lot of the gardens I go into are blank canvases. They're just wall-to-wall turf with some fences. So they're pretty dull and boring. And of course, a couple of years later, as will be the case study I've got for you tonight, you'll see just how much wildlife can come into a garden in a very short space of time. So I think, yeah, for me, it is just seeing the fantastic impact that these little habitats can have on the wildlife and the people, of course. And I'm sure it's very good for their mental well-being as well, to look out the window and see, feeders full of sparrows and blue tits and great tits, rather than just blank nothingness, So, good all round, I think.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people who were gardening or turned to gardening during lockdowns, both lockdowns, especially the one earlier this year, and how delighted they were to grow their first tomatoes or their first courgette or something. I'm a gardening Luddite, I have to admit, but I've always thought of gardening as torture, implemented by my parents when I was doing something wrong. I was banished to the garden to water it or dig up whatever, weed something. So I've always associated with the hard soil. And I also thought of gardening as being a very British thing. I didn't think that people in Europe or America kind of indulge in the same kind of garden. Is gardening kind of a universal thing, or do you think it's more people in Britain are more kind of into it than elsewhere?
Oh, I think it's definitely a British tradition. I mean, we are a nation of garden lovers. I mean, look how many TV garden presenters we've got, for one. But I mean, I think, I've spent quite a bit of time in the States over the years, and it is very different over there. They see it as a yard, and a lot of people. And of course, a lot of the gardens don't even have boundaries. They sort of merge into one. And I noticed that a lot in Germany as well. So, perceptions are very different. But I think there's a growing movement for people to see these outdoor spaces as habitats for wildlife now. I'm pretty sure that 40% of my YouTube views at the moment are coming from India. A hell of a lot of response from there, where people are really keen to try and make a difference and make an effort. And I mean, India is obviously huge, but there's, I think there's about 1 billion people in India, so of course space is a premium. And like people like yourselves with just a balcony, or in cities and urban spaces, they're then realizing that even these small patches can have a good effect, a positive effect for wildlife. Diverging slightly off the question, but I think going back to what you said, I think we are a nation of garden lovers. It's very apparent, but I do think, as I say, moods are changing towards this style of gardening, and I get people contact me from all over the world. I had somebody email in from Canada yesterday saying, I've got 5 acres, lucky them, with woodland things. I want to make it, we want to retire there one day, but I don't know what to do with it. I've got a friend of mine who's in Panama who's looking to do some sort of butterfly style planting schemes, even though he lives in a jungle. So it doesn't matter where you are around the world, there's still ways you can improve your garden. And it might be that you've got a postage stamp like yourself. It might be that you've got 5 acres in Canada, but we can all have a positive effect. And I think that's the main thing. And hopefully, between what you're doing and what I'm doing, and hopefully a bit of collaboration, as we've talked about, then watch this space. Then we can make a big difference, and everybody out there watching this, hopefully, my long-term goal is to just inspire and encourage as many people as possible to create these habitats. I mean, I'm now personally on nearly 100 ponds that I've created for wildlife, which will hit next year. But the nicest thing for me is knowing that it's had a direct implication around the world. To know that other people, I've had people from India and all over the world just contact me and say, here's what I made, here's what I've done, because I've seen your YouTube video, because of this. And for me, that's the best feeling in the world, because having a worldwide impact from a little computer. Quite incredible, really, isn't it?
That's amazing. I did tell you that I once made a pond when I was about 8 in my back garden. I made it illegally because it's one of the times when I was actually banished to the garden to water the plants or something. So I decided to dig a pond behind my parents' back without asking if I could do it. So I just basically took some land over and made a pond. But what I forgot to do, or didn't realize I needed to do, was to line it. So it became a marsh.
Oh, I see.
So, I kind of got discovered, and also, my pond didn't work anyway. But it's interesting. I'd like to know, actually, maybe later on, what, because I've got a few American friends here. I just wondered what what gardening was like in the US. Is it a big thing? Are there TV programs and famous gardeners out there doing stuff? It'd be interesting to know. And also with my terrace, part of the reason why I haven't done anything is the fact that I'm never here normally. And I thought to myself, what's the point of growing a plant, leaving it there in 44 degrees heat for weeks, months on end, coming back and it's just a burnt cinder. It's not fair on the plant, so I might as well just leave it as a derelict piece of concrete.
Mm. Well, you have got house martins opposite, haven't you? My favourite bird, of course. I remember you showing me them before. Have you got any as a potential to get them on your building?
I've got them outside my balcony. I've got 3 pairs.
Showing off now.
Reason, when I moved in, the landlord said to me, because I noticed he had the CDs up to stop them from nesting, I said, they come with me. If I can't have the house martins, I ain't moving in. I took a risk, but he said, okay, fine. So I've now got 3 pairs, which I'm really happy about. Anyway, Joel, let's talk about some of your work. So maybe you can talk us through your latest project.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, this is actually a project that I designed and created a few years ago now. And it's one that was a bit of a challenge, but it's, I think, a really good one. And it's one that sort of resonates probably the most with people when I do this or sort of give it as a presentation, because it's quite a small urban garden. I could waffle on about people having 2 acres that I've done meadows for and multiple ponds, but I think, the challenge that I love the most is trying to fit as many habitats as possible into a little urban space. So it's one that I really, really enjoyed doing. And I think, as I say, I think will sort of resonate with most people. And it's one that is on an urban housing estate. The houses were built probably late 90s, early 2000s. It's classic sort of 3-bed semi, nothing special. And when I first visited the site, it was literally a wall of conifers. I mean, talk about these people wanting some privacy. God knows what they got up to, but it was just a wall of conifers, all 3 sides of the garden. There was no light. I mean, there was no lawn. It was just moss down the middle. So the initial job was to sort of cut the trees back and let a bit more light into the garden. Then as time went on, I think it's probably my best ever case of, while you're here, could you just, what about, hang on a minute. I think I ended up spending about 2 months there in the end, on and off. So we started with, and unfortunately, because it was just initially like a clearance job, if you like, I didn't actually get any before photos because I didn't think it would end up the way it's ended up now, which is this fabulous little wildlife garden. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try, wish me luck everyone. Here we go. Good old technology. Try and give you.
This is technology. It works amazingly when you don't press the record button.
Oh yeah. The amount of times I've done that and had a bird in front of me that I wanted to photograph or film. Right, okay. Let's have a look.
So whilst you're doing that, did you have you found work in terms of, during the pandemic? Has there been a lot of work for you?
I've had some people obviously pull out, unfortunately, because they've been in some very unfortunate positions, as have no doubt many, many people around the country and the world, of course, who have been unfortunate to lose their jobs. And of course, the garden is therefore, the first thing to be dropped in terms of a project. It's not essential. We don't need a garden. Well, you could argue that a garden is essential. I would certainly, but in terms of finances, of course, with these difficult, we've all got to cut back. So naturally, I've lost a few clients who are hoping to pick the project up again once their sort of circumstances improve. But it did make for materials to sort of get hold of materials, particularly pond liners. At one point, I was waiting about 2 months to get a pond liner delivered. So I was sort of going around the country, and I did about 4 ponds in London over a 2 or 3 week time frame. Dug them all out and got them all ready for the lining, then ordered all the liners, then went back, and planted up and did about 4 ponds within a couple of weeks, just to try and get them finished off. But yeah, materials were a bit of an issue, and but I think things have sort of picked up a bit. Certainly, I'm certainly not short of a few jobs, but yeah, I'm hoping to sort of expand a little bit in the spring and get a few more staff so we can sort of cope with the inquiries a bit more, which is a nice position to be in, but makes for a few long weekends as well as weeks. So, but it's good. It's all in the name of wildlife. So anyway,
do you think that Brexit's going to affect you?
I mean, inevitably, it will put some of the material costs up. Some of the a lot of the pond liners are actually imported from the EU. So yeah, I think the liners will probably go up. Timber naturally will, of course. We import so much timber as a country. Yeah, and so I suspect that sort of thing will. A lot of my stuff though is reclaimed, to be fair. So if I'm doing garden makeovers and laying patios, a lot of it is reclaimed stone, reclaimed walling, which is obviously sourced in the UK. So that shouldn't be too much of an increase at all there, hopefully. But yeah, same with anything. I think we've got ourselves into this mess, haven't we? We're all going to have to now suffer the consequences and pay a bit more for stuff, I think, which is not bad in some respects in the food world. But yeah, I think it's good to have an open mind in these situations, isn't it? And expect the worst, because mind you, it can't get much worse, I guess, can it?
Okay, are you getting on with your film?
Yes, I think we're there. So I'm going to try and share screen. Okay, so you should now not see my face, but just see my little iMovie thing. So has that gone full screen for you all?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I'll just put this back. I've done it as a series of photos. It was just easiest for me to do. Yeah, I didn't film any of this at the beginning because this was a few years ago before I got my 4K camera. So this was the garden kind of just after its cleared stage, if you like. So you can see we've sort of put a fence all the way around the three sides, because once the conifers came down, as you can imagine, it was quite an exposed plot. So yeah, if we go to the next couple of photos, yeah, a bit more fencing. You can see part of the conifers that had to go next door because they were leaning over so much. But you can see, if I just pause it here for a second, you can see a few of the elements that were left in the garden. Few shrubs. I think we ended up leaving the lilac in that back corner near the green compost bin. Again, the lawn, you can see, was almost non-existent. Little bit of box hedging front right hand corner there. But one thing we did do, we kept a load of the old conifer logs, because of course deadwood in a garden is an absolute essential feature. Everybody should have some, and ideally you can put them in the ground like this. This would be classed as like a hibernaculum, if you like. So this would be anything for kind of newts, common lizards, frogs, toads, through the winter months, to obviously get in amongst all those crevices and get down underground, where, I mean, ground temperatures generally stay around 6 degrees once you dig down all year round. So that's why it's obviously great to include these little kind of nooks and crannies underground where they can stay warm and stay above freezing in the winter months. But equally, you can add those in upright. I mean, I in a lot of gardens I put in logs into the ground, not with concrete or anything, just with mud, and then just tamp back around the bottom of them, and drill some holes in them so they kind of double up, so that they can be good for masonry bees and solitary bees and all sorts of insects, even sort of little wasp species as well, which are great. And anything from sort of a 4 mil to a sort of 11 mil hole on those generally is really good to have a different varieties and sizes of these holes to encourage these insects, obviously in a sunny spot where you can, but they will work as well in shade, but also for, depending on where you are in the country, sort of lesser stag beetles and stag beetles. Now stag beetles are kind of more south and east, but lesser stag beetles go quite a way up the country. They're these cracking insects. I mean, of course, we all know them, are these big pincers on the front of their heads. And I actually saw my first one about May, June time, actually, this year. I think it was actually June, when I was doing a pond in Colchester, and I unearthed a whole colony of them when I was revamping this pond. And found a load of grubs, and oh, it was amazing. The grubs were like, I'm not kidding you, like this big. These big white chunky. It looked like something out of I'm a Celebrity. You know, they were quite big beasts, but they're amazing things. Which, and apparently they live up to about 7 years underground as that grub form before they emerge as the adults. So yeah, fantastic to see those. I've never seen stag beetles. Seen lesser stags, and they're a good size, sort of inch and a half sort of thing. But yeah, so standing deadwood in the ground as an upright, and then obviously that rotting timber underground keeps a uniform temperature all year round, which of course is great for the larvae to develop. So yeah, deadwood, log piles, anything like that. Now, one of the main aims in the project, of course, was to encourage these little guys, which I'm sure most of you will identify as house sparrows. Once probably a much more familiar sound within our urban settings. However, they have, of course, declined massively in the last few years, and they're such an enigmatic little bird. I mean, they're really. I've got a buddleia outside the back of the house that houses about 20 to 30 of these in the winter months, and just life wouldn't be the same without the chirping of house sparrows, I don't think. But sadly, of course, they have moved into our towns. They're no longer really in our countrysides much anymore. And where I'm actually working here in North Yorkshire, the funny thing is it's the exact same there. And the house sparrows and the tree sparrows, there's 2 colonies in the garden where I'm working. There's about anywhere between 30 to 40 tree sparrows. And literally within a stone's throw, maybe 100 yards, you go onto the edge of the village or into the edge of the village, and there are no tree sparrows, and it completely swaps to house sparrows, and they're all on the eaves of the houses, of course. It's great. I mean, I've never been anywhere in the country where you can do that, actually. It's lovely to see, and the chap I'm working for has a big, long hawthorn hedge that, yeah, sometimes houses, dozens and dozens of them. I think he had about 300 new tree sparrows that he ringed this year in his garden. He's a ringer, of course. Yeah, cracking little bird. Anyway, house sparrows are the subject here, and they are such a fantastic little bird. And these ones are actually nested in the side of the house on the ivy, but there's only 1 or 2, maybe 3 pairs. So the idea was to really try and encourage more habitat for them to nest and breed, and of course provide food for them. So first things first, put some colony boxes up, and as you can see here, put up 3 colony boxes, and that's not one giant luxurious box. That's actually 3 houses in one, if you like. And on the middle box there, you can probably see there's a hole facing you, a hole on the front, and then a hole on the far side. So house sparrows are quite territorial. Although they are colony nesters, they will like to be kind of facing away from each other. They don't tend to enjoy that too much of a close contact with the neighbours. So a bit like many of us around the world, I guess. And as you can see, before too long, they all moved in and started looking at those boxes almost immediately. It was quite fascinating watching them do that. So really great. And of course, as I say, this ivy was the key thing for the house sparrows, and the key thing for attracting them to any garden, no matter where you are around the world, is just simply cover. Whether that's just some ivy on the side of a house. As I say, I've got them in a giant buddleia on the back of my house. I've known them to inhabit just a privet shrub, like a bush, single bush, anything dense cover. They love dense cover because, of course, they feel safe and less likely to be predated by sparrowhawks and that sort of thing. So to encourage the ivy was one thing. This cheeky chap went and made a home in the starling box first year, and you can see the corner has just been cut off there for a starling. Starling's like a bigger hole, 38mm hole, yeah, that was supposed to be for starlings, but sparrows got in there first, but no, we didn't mind that too much. So here is the garden just sort of slightly after it's been completed. So you can see we've put this fencing up, and we've actually got some trellising that we then attach to the inside of that with like a 6-inch gap between the trellis, with the view to that being a complete sort of green wall, if you like, around the whole of the garden. One key thing about urban plots is trying to have vertical space, or think of your vertical space as well, because of course it's not all just the flat space. You can create your own habitat on a vertical wall. I mean, these are 6-foot fences, so yeah, quite easy to do, and a great use of space as well. And you can see, so along the left-hand border, we have lots of native shrubs. So we've got a holly there. We've got, I believe, is a rowan, on the left, we've got the old, I think that is the old lilac stump just in front of the compost bin in the back. We had the chap had a little fiberglass pond. So, I mean, normally I'd do a rubber liner pond because you can sort of shape them a bit better. But the chap had a fiberglass pond, so he sunk that in the ground. You can see we've got log stacks at the back. We've got native shrubs and trees planted all the way around the garden. Climber species such as winter flowering jasmine, honeysuckle, wild clematis, the old man's beard, some of you may know it as. So you can see the little bird bath as well, and the box hedging in the front of the picture there. And the lawn was actually turfed. We did turf the lawn with a wildflower turf, with a view to it being kind of mown on a high setting, so it was a nectar lawn, full of things such as red clover, bird's-foot trefoil, self-heal, yarrow, box-eye daisy as well, all stuff that can adapt to being mown on a regular basis and flower at 3 to 4 inches. So you get all the benefits of the accessibility for us as humans, but also all the insect attractants for, or the plants for attracting the insects as well. So yeah, quite a nice idea there, that is. And also you can see these lumps of bark in the borders and logs. All stuff like that is, of course, great little habitat and nooks and crannies for all sorts of spiders, centipedes, woodlice, everything else just to kind of hide in. If it's just bare earth, there's not going to be a lot living there. I'd like to point out, if you could all note, just above the compost bin, right at the back, there's a little robin box in the back left-hand corner that are built into the trellis there. Just bear that in mind for later, because you'll see what became of that. And if we go to the next slide. So this is, again, then panning right. So this is the right-hand side of the garden. And the chap wanted a little seating area, so I put that little patio in with a brick edge around it, just so that he could sit and enjoy his little wildlife oasis, which of course would inevitably be a nice spot in time. On the right hand side, you can see we've got a pyracantha, a brilliant one for house sparrows actually, because of course those bit of a pain in the what's it to trim, of course, with those big long spikes. But obviously berry potentially is very good for birds, for autumn food for birds. And the cover, once that thing gets going, as any of you will know, is kind of second to none really. There's no sparrowhawks getting into the middle of one of them when they're established. And you can probably just make out some of the climbers around the edges. And another nice rowan tree at the back there, I believe. So if we go to the next photo, again, this is just a little bit further right. You can just see on the right of your screen there another robin box, north or east facing for bird boxes, if you put in any up, by the way, just so that they can stay as cool as possible. If you put them south or west facing, they can get a bit hot, and yeah, the chicks can unfortunately just die if it is too hot, a really hot summer. So again, you can see those climbers up those trellises there, or we just sort of wound through the trellis. It was quite nice. And that tree, the main tree on the right hand side there, is an older tree, ALDER, which are good in wet conditions. If you've got heavy clay, wet ground, they're very good for that. And great for things like siskins and redpole as well, if you're trying to bring them into an area. They love the little seed pods on those, so they work very well. Again, more logs against the bottom as well. And just at the base of that older tree, which is just off the top of the screen there, we did a little sort of shady woodland garden, so this was quite a nice little feel. We put a tiny little barrel, as you can see in the ground there, just to see what sort of turned up. And actually, froglets, you know, baby frogs, they love these little sort of frog hostels, if you like, I like to call them, which are sort of little pools of water in amongst the borders. They love to kind of hang out in them. And also we planted it so you can see things like we've got red campion, some of the bigger greener clumps. We've got some hart's tongue ferns, we've got cowslips, primroses, all sorts of stuff that went in there, a bit of hardrush as well, stuff that'll do well in shade, some stinking iris or gladden, logs as well, sunken in to create more sort of rotting log habitat, so a nice little sort of woodland border in there. And that's, you can just about make out there. We've got some bluebells that we planted around them, but this is a hazel that we planted, one of the best shrubs you can plant for wildlife, really. A great all-rounder, hazel is. And you can see those green sort of sprigs of bluebells coming up in the first spring, which we, of course, put some wood chip in there as well, so that was quite a nice feel through there. More logs again, more habitat. The more logs, the better. Can you guess a bit of a theme going here? And more bluebells again. Primroses looking absolutely fantastic in the first spring. Now this is the side of the house. So remember the house sparrow boxes we looked at a few moments ago? They were literally just above the top of this ivy, which, as you can see, is a bit of a a beast of a plant, but a great bit of habitat as well. And it was just so funny working on this, because of course I'd not really heard the wood pigeons in there. So when I turned up one morning, I just started work, and then about 6 or 7 wood pigeons just left this ivy and scared the life out of me. But yeah, really nice bit of habitat that is. So that was just trimmed down it was going over the gutter and everything, so that was trimmed down. Obviously those boxes put up. But this was kind of the side of the house. The driveway is between us now and the wall, as you can see it. But it was this thin strip along the bottom that we thought, well, what can we do with it? It's a bit of a no man's land, but with a bit of ingenuity, one thing we thought we could do is capture all the rainwater from the roof of the house. And here you can see it just as it's finished. So we actually connected these kind of slimline, no, not actually a standard size, but yeah, big enough to take it, that border. So a couple of standard size water butts, which were connected to the downpipe on the side of the house, which of course collects loads and loads of rainwater. A great way of topping up, and the best way of topping up your wildlife pond if you can do it. And of course the back garden, you can just see is to the right of the screen, just around the back of the house through that metal gate, which you can just make out. So that's the back garden that we will come on to in a moment. But again, this was just a bit of a, what can we do with this little space? And again, more log piles, loads of herbaceous perennials went in here. There was, oh God, I can't even remember half of them now. There's some teasers, some red valerian, red campion, horseshoe vetch, bladder campion, birdsfoot trefoil. I could go on, but you'll no doubt see it in a few moments' time. But that was the idea with that, to really make it kind of a nectar border, if you like. And as we came towards the gate, a bit more kind of shade tolerant. So there's a nice older buckthorn shrub in the middle of your screen there, which those of you that know your butterflies will know that in the UK we have a lovely butterfly called the brimstone. It's lemon yellow, sort of sulphur-looking butterfly, which is a cracking little insect, and we'll see if those turn up shortly. But they lay their eggs on the older buckthorn, so planted one of those. More logs again, red campion, some wild strawberry on the edge there as well, I can see. So yeah, some tansy as well, another good nectar plant. And so here it is. This was later on in the summer. Same year. This isn't like 2 years on or anything like that. So you can see it's absolute profusion of colour already, and those herbaceous perennials have really took hold, and they just got this lovely sort of trailing effect over the side of the borders. So you can see the pink and the red on the sort of centre and left is the red valerian, which of course is a Mediterranean plant introduced some years ago now, a few decades ago, middle of the 20th century, I believe. But it's really colonised well across the UK. And of course, it's a favourite for the hummingbird hawk moth. If you've been fortunate enough to see those, a cracking little day flying moth. Love to nectar on those, but they're really good nectar plant they are. Just trying to see what I can see along the edges there. You've got some bladder campion, which I'll come on to in a second. Lovely horseshoe vetch, that yellow one sort of trailing over in front of the water butts, and some lovely red campion, more of a pink colour, back right. I think there's a couple of close-ups now which will show you those. Which would just, yeah, that's looking from the other direction. So that again is showing the red campion in the foreground, a little bit of white campion just to the left of that. And obviously that honeysuckle now growing up nicely, put on a fair bit of growth in the first season and was going up and through the trellis work around those water butts just to hide it. Again, birdsfoot trefoil and horseshoe vetch trailing down the side of that lovely oak sleeper, which was a nice one. Some geraniums in the background, probably meadow cranesbill. And yeah, some leucanthemums yet to flower, I believe, some big oxeye daisy type flowers. So a really nice border, and one that is a great little attractant for so many insects. And of course, it's effectively a bit of waste ground. It's only about 1.5 meters, if that, wide along the side of the house. And most people would just think, oh, well, I can't do anything with that. Yes, you can. And there you go. A bit of ragged robin in there as well above the birdsfoot trefoil there, which is a great spring plant, of course, in the UK. And funnily enough, the rest of the housing estate is so bland, it's almost like it might as well be astroturfed. But, you know, the neighbours' kids were coming out looking at this saying, I really love this. And, you know, they were looking at all the bees and the butterflies, and, you know, parents that you would think would not take the slightest bit of interest in the natural world were soon walking over with their kids to have a look what they could see around the flowers. So it was great, a great little sort of feel to the cul-de-sac. So this again is looking back into the back garden. So the area we've just been looking at was just off shot to the left through that little gate down the side of the house. But this is looking back to give you a bit more perspective. You see that older tree on the left-hand side, the little woodland border down to the left. and of course the bird feeders on the right hand side, so that when the chap that owns his house was sat at his kitchen table doing his work or marking, he was a teacher, so he could sit out there and watch the birds on the feeders. And key point here is, if you're looking to attract birds into your garden, I would always say encourage them around cover. You know, a lot of people make the mistake of putting a bird feeder in the middle of a lawn and thinking, well, they'll turn up, you know, it's a feeder, it's got the right food. It doesn't matter what the food is. If it's in the wrong situation, they won't feel comfortable enough to use it. And that, of course, is because you've got things like sparrowhawks, which can zip over a fence, and, you know, they're sort of, they're toast, if you like. They just can't get away fast enough. So if you're putting up feeders for birds, always hang them on the edges of bushes or next to some cover so they can just zip back into the cover. That will make a big difference to the amount of birds that you get on your feeders, absolutely. So then the next side, I believe, that's one of my favourites. That is cuckoo flower, which is the favourite larval food plant, or one of the two favourite larval food plants for my favourite butterfly, answering your question, Dave, about invertebrates. The orange tip butterfly, which lays its eggs on the developing seed pods, or just underneath the flower head, actually. Bright orange little eggs, you can't miss them. And they also lay on garlic mustard in the UK, or jack by the hedge, as many people may know it. So yeah, a great one for your garden. A good plant for damp areas as well. They're also loved by things such as the bee flies. You might see them in the spring. They're sort of almost like hoverflies, but with a fatter, sort of mousy-like brown body. They're fantastic little insects there as well. They like to nectar on them too. So planted some of these in the lawn. These are obviously snake's head fritillaries. And as a nation of garden lovers, this is probably, it was certainly my grand's favourite plant. And yeah, what a fantastic little plant they are. Can't really beat them. So the cowslips and the primroses, obviously in that woodland border, amongst that wood, and the wood chip just really made a nice kind of woodlandy feel. And of course, they are a great source of nectar for, you know, really sort of early emerging bees and insects as well. So the key thing, another key thing with a wildlife garden, is to, of course, try and attract or provide food for insects throughout the course of the year. So as early as February, even January, some years you can see bumblebees, you know, kind of bashing into snowdrop flowers at the end of January. So to provide nectar for as long as period as possible is always key as well. So look for flowers that start in the spring, things like the primroses and snowdrops, of course, as well. And then right the way through to the end of the year, things such as scabiouses and red valerian, which can flower quite long as well. So here's that little pond, which is now slightly smaller by the time the vegetation has encroached. But again, access in and out, because they've got fairly steep sides. Key, if you're doing a pond, access in and out of a garden with logs, cobbles, stones, anything you can find, just to create a bit of a ramp in and out, so that things like hedgehogs don't come a cropper and fall in and can't get out. But around the margins there, you can see some lovely wildflowers. There's some yarrow, some ragged robin, there's oxeye daisies, purple loose strife, some watermint, brook lime, yeah, loads and loads there. Some nice water soldiers in the middle as well. But yeah, a really nice little pond, and one that will no doubt attract a lot of wildlife for many years to come. So the little seating area in the corner, you can see those climbers really starting to take a hold and sort of winding their way through the trellis work, so doing their job absolutely. Bit more red valerian. It's a good one for shade as well. Obviously, it won't get as many insects to visit it, but red valerian, fantastic for working in shade as well. I've seen butterflies nectaring on it in full shade on a north-facing wall before. So, yeah, on a hot day, butterflies will obviously prefer a little bit of shade rather than overcooking. So, buddleia in that back right-hand corner as well. Bit controversial, but I always like to put a buddleia in the gardens that I create. I just think they're fantastic. So here we go. That's proof of the pudding. That's the brimstone butterfly. That's obviously a female laying an egg on the older buckthorn that was planted in the garden. So that's brilliant to see. And of course, these are great wanderers. They can travel many, many miles. So it's great to, and the sense of smell is fantastic as well. So if you get even just one of these shrubs in the garden, they will definitely find it and come in if you're in the right part of the country. Fairly widespread across the UK, of course. This is that red campion, absolutely looking cracking, and a bit of white campion to the left as well. what a block of colour that is. But of course, red camping is great because it does tend to have a bit of a second flush, and it's quite a long flowering period. So a really good one for the garden. And the seeds are so easy to collect as well. They're in these lovely sort of little brown pods when they dry off. And if you just sprinkle them out in your hand and just scatter them through the garden, you'll be pulling it up for the rest of your life. It's a very easy to establish wildflower, but a good one for shade as well. Put up a little bird table as well so some species of bird, of course, prefer to eat off the ground or off a flat platform. You won't find a blackbird, here's where somebody corrects me, necessarily on a peanut feeder. They, of course, prefer to be skulking through the undergrowth and pecking at seed off the ground mostly. So things like blackbirds, robins, dunnocks, although robins, of course, have developed a fantastic ability to adapt to our feeders over recent years, I've noticed. Things like reed bunting as well, all ground nesting birds. Not ground nesting, ground feeding birds. They'll prefer a flat platform. So a flat platform as a food source for birds is a good one to add to your garden. And that was on the side of the trellis work, as you can see. There you go. There's some inhabitants for the pond for you. There was about 7 on that log before the photo was taken, honestly, and they actually found the pond very quickly within the first year and started breeding. So that was fantastic to see. Amazing ability frogs and newts have to just find water bodies. It's just incredible how they do. God alone knows. I've had them turn up in gardens, or people message me and say they've turned up in a garden in central London that's just surrounded by retaining walls, and you think, well, how on earth do they make it? But they do. They're amazing climbers. So never underestimate the powers that wildlife has to find in a pond in terms of newts, frogs and toads. Here we are then. This is actually the following season. So this is 2 years, just 2 years. And as you can see, from what was just a bare, effectively trellis bit of fencing, you've now got this fabulous, lush green oasis in the middle of a housing estate, which is just home to so much life. I mean, I dread to think how many insect species there are there now. But on the left, you can see a few white flowers right on the left of the screen of Guelder Rose, which is a nice shrub, lovely autumnal colour, sort of red currant type berries, which are great for the birds. And the shrubs as well have established around the garden. The pyrocanthus making a bid for freedom towards the centre of the garden on the right. You can see the white flowers there. The woodland border down to the right behind the bit of box is obviously growing really well. You've got red camping coming up there, doing really well in that shade, as I already said. Lots of teasels on the left, which of course will be great in the following year. Teasels are biennial, but they are fantastic for our seed feeding birds, things such as goldfinches. So obviously leave the heads over winter time if you can, so that these birds have access to the seed instead of cutting everything off as soon as it dies. It's one of our biggest problems, I think, as a nation. We're very tidy people, and we need to kind of just let nature be over the winter months. I think certainly things like Verbena bonariensis and teasels, they are great seeds, a great source of seeds for goldfinches, as I say, through the winter. Classic patch of nettles on the left there. Yes, every garden needs a patch, ideally in a little bit of sun so you can attract things. And actually many of our butterflies use that as a larval food source. So red admiral, peacock, small tortoiseshell and comma will all use nettle for a larval food plant. So 4 of our 56, 57 species actually use nettle as a food plant. So don't discourage it to 100%. Leave a little bit, even if you put some in a pot. I know it's completely balmy, but try and get some in a pot because they are just a great resource. And and in a sunny spot as well in the garden if you can. Now, remember I said to you a little while ago about a robin box in the back left-hand corner of the garden? Well, good luck trying to find it now, but that's exactly what they want. They want this cover and they want this kind of overgrown habitat. I mean, I've known robins nesting shoes on top of garden refuse sacks, kettles, Wellington boots. They will nest nearly anywhere, but if you put a little box like that with an open front, like a letterbox, bird box, tuck it into a corner of a garden in amongst some ivy or some shrubs, they will nest anywhere, but the kind of the more secluded the better. I would actually challenge yourself to put one in a position where you think they would be least likely to find it, and I guarantee you they will find it and nest in it. Not that you'll remember by that time of the year, of course. So yes, you can see that the nectar lawn It's still establishing, and this is just after a cut actually, so there weren't many flowers left. But of course, by cutting those flowers as well on a regular basis, say every 10 to 14 days, you are encouraging fresh, lush growth, and of course a lot more nectar therefore for the insects. So a bit of constant management isn't the end of the world. So let's go to the next slide, see if we can see anything else. So another bit of a close-up there, you can see those sort of teasel stems on the left-hand side, more of the red campion. But it's just full of colour. You might be able to make out very, very back fence. There's a lovely lime green leaf right in the centre, and that is a hop, which of course, you know, many of us would associate with the production of some alcoholic beverages. But hop is actually a fantastic. It was the original larval food plant of the common butterfly before they actually adapted to breed on nettles. Of course, hop production has dropped so much over the last couple of centuries that you don't really see them that often now. But a really good plant hop is for creating broad coverage over a fence or something like that in a very short time frame. Mine grows 8 foot in a year, no problem at all, even if it's cut down to the base. So yeah, hops definitely would recommend one, and good for shady areas as well. This is that woodland border again, so you can see a bit of yellow archangel in the middle, oxeye daisy is about to flower, red campion in a profusion of colour. Yeah, cracking little spot that is, and full of tiny frogs as well when I went back, which is brilliant. So yes, this is the photo. I should have said, remember that robin box. So it's actually right behind those lime green leaves in that corner, and yeah, tucked away. And the robin did actually nest in it, funnily enough. And I stand corrected. I've just realised that the tree stem to the right is actually a crabapple. I thought it was a rowan earlier, but a bit harder to tell when they haven't got any leaf on. So yeah, very good. And just to the right of the hop, you can see some old man's beard on the trellis work there, which is another cracking climber. I planted some in my garden last spring, so it's only had 2 seasons, and it's already covered 2 fence panels. So really good for creating very quick cover for nesting birds, and good for the insects as well when it flowers. So yeah, just a couple more clips of this I think now, but you can see then, I'll just go back a touch. You can see that buddleia in the back right-hand corner is starting to establish and has gone up above the fence now. All the climbers are working their way through nicely to create this brilliant nesting potential for birds. And of course, in time, with those added woody stems, they will, of course, attract things such as blackbirds, robins, song thrushes, you know, all birds that build their own nests, of course, and prefer like a bit of a flat cavity in a shrub somewhere or on a ledge. So by having this framework of that trellising around on the inside of the fences, it gives that 3D feel for a fence, and of course provides some great framework for them to be able to build their nest in. And there have been a couple of blackbirds that have since nested in that trellis work, which of course wouldn't have done had they not have been put up. So a really nice thing to know there. This is that bladder campion. This is just a cracking little plant. This, as you can see, you know, sort of where it gets its name from in the shape of the flowers. But this is that side garden again, later on in the summer, side of the house. You can see the honeysuckle doing a great job of masking those water butts. And just this whole thing providing a huge wealth of nectar for so many insects. And so there we are. That is effectively the last slide. It's a cracking little garden, and it's 5 by 10 meters. I didn't even tell you the size at the beginning. It's 5 by 10 meters, so it's not huge. And for those that are fortunate enough to have a garden will no doubt have one at least this size. And it goes to show you can put in trees and shrubs for birds, climbing plants, nesting potential for birds, a flowering nectar lawn, a wildlife pond, herbaceous borders, again, trees and shrubs, bird boxes themselves, a little seating area. You know, let's dedicate at least 3 square meters for ourselves. So I think, you know, it's a great example of what you can do with a tiny space. I say tiny, you know, it's pretty small. And actually now some of the figures for that site, there are now over 40 house sparrows. The colony has bred over the last few years and gone to about 40, I believe, which are regularly seen on the feeders. And of course, not only that, they are seen throughout the garden and then throughout the town, which is really nice as well. So, and also the starling numbers have increased because of the boxes that have been put up. The brimstone butterflies have obviously come in and laid their eggs and produced year after year on that older buckthorn on the right-hand side that you can see. And it's really a great little spot for wildlife. So I hope that's given a few of you a few ideas as to how you can encourage wildlife into your own garden. And it's certainly been a nice voyage of discovery for me as well. You know, I'm always learning on the job. And yeah, it's so nice now to see so much wildlife moving into what is effectively such a small space. So what do you think, Dave? Do you fancy one of them on your balcony?
That was fabulous, Joel. I mean, thank you so much for sharing that, because it just goes to show that you don't need to have a massive space. You know, even a small space is amazing for wildlife, because you've got to think also that a lot of the wildlife you're attracting are tiny. So that area, I mean, some of the shots you had in that film or your presentation, it looked like a jungle. If you're an ant or, you know, a small, you know, bee or something, it's just an oasis. So it's just incredible. It's fantastic, and I'm sure it's going to serve as a massive inspiration for a lot of people, not only tonight Zooming, but also in the future. We have a few questions, but I think what we're going to do, because we're kind of coming up to the hour, we're going to do that during the party zone. So if you guys can hang on for the even more exciting bit at the end. But I've got a couple of questions for you quickly. In terms of, you know, people sort of taking up gardening now, I mean, I was during the summer, you know, speaking to a lot of people who were in lockdown, and they said, right, you know, I'm here at home, so I'm going to go out and start trimming this and cutting that. And there's one person I knew, and she cut her hedge down. She had a sort of a hedge that separated her from some fields behind her. And I said, why do you do that? Oh, well, there's nothing in there. I mean, I was like horrified. But have you got any advice for people, if there is another lockdown, God forbid, but if there's another one next spring or what have you, what advice would you give people in terms of, you know, tidying up, in inverted commas?
Don't do it. Um, well, no, I mean it's difficult, and I was talking to somebody on YouTube about this the other day, and I said it's very difficult. I mean, he has a meadow in the south of France, and he says I'm just every year it's a quandary. When do I cut my meadow? He says if I do it in September, I've still got, you know, common blues, brown argus, geranium bronze butterflies flying around. He said if I do it in October, I've still got stuff flowering. My scabious is still in flower. He said, if I do it in November, he said, I've got, you know, all my leaves of my lizard orchids coming back up. So, you know, it is the case that it doesn't matter when you cut, you are going to disturb things, and that is the key point. You are going to have an impact no matter what you do. Obviously, I would refrain from moving any log piles, any brash piles, anywhere where you might think there might be overwintering hedgehogs, frogs, newts, toads. Any of that I would leave until, you know, sort of February, March time. You know, don't do it this time of year or November, because of course things are going into hibernation. If you're cutting back things like ivy, I would probably tend to leave that until after the berries have been eaten by any sort of birds through the winter months. So again, maybe January, February time, that sort of thing as well, I would say is probably best. But it depends a lot on the situation. I mean, a herbaceous border, for example, so anything you've got that's full of echinaceas, lavender, nepenthes, I always leave mine. I mean, in this country, as I said briefly in the presentation, you know, there's most people cut things back in October. You know, so they've got literally just a bare border with a few little woody stumps all through the year, all through the winter. And I think, well, why would you want to look at that all winter when you can look at these lovely sort of dead seed heads of different various flowers? And of course, so most of my herbaceous stuff I cut back in the spring. So I do it March time. As soon as you start seeing sort of the basil, leaves and everything coming back, that's when it's time to cut it all back. So leave some seeds on through all the winter months. And of course, remember, going back to ivy, you know, if you start disturbing ivy in the winter months, you could be disturbing a lot of overwintering butterflies, things such as red admiral, peacock, small tortoiseshell, brimstone. They're all going to be deep in that ivy, trying to hide away for the winter months. So I would avoid the depths of winter and try and get most of your tidying up, if you're going to do it, sort of very, very early spring, very late winter, if that makes sense. So sort of February, March time.
Yeah, it's a shame that we're so obsessed with tidying up, and we always think that to be tidy is better. It's just
the amount of hedgerows I see flailed in October that are just full of hawthorn berries. and you think, well, that's just a load of food that's just wasted now for the birds. All the field fares, all the redwings coming over from Scandinavia, they've just completely wiped out their food source for the winter. So, yeah, it's heartbreaking to see. So we've just got to keep changing perceptions as much as we can, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to speak some more in the next portion of tonight. But firstly, you've already told me what your favourite invertebrate is. You told us all, which is the orange tip. Has your favourite plant changed since the last time you were here?
Still got to be bird's foot trefoil. I think just because of the amount of gardens I put it in, and then common blue butterflies have moved into the garden and started breeding. I think for me, cracking little plants, so good for bees as well. I absolutely love it. And of course, it's also the larval food plant of green hair streak butterfly and the 6-spot Bennett moth. So yeah, really good, great all-round plant, and just brightens up any lawn. You can put it in a lawn, in a meadow, in a herbaceous border, in a herb bed. It doesn't matter. It'll just grow anywhere almost. And yeah, brilliant wildlife. So yeah, that's still the same.
Yeah, and your location you'd want to be in, notwithstanding the COVID pandemic, where would you be right now?
I think I would be in my little garden in France, just sat by the river with a coat on, listening to the kingfishers and the grey wagtails, I think, as much as I could. Even in the depths of winter, you can't beat sitting by a river.
Fantastic. Zoomers, just to let you know that coming up tomorrow, we've got Emma Mitchell. She is going to be talking about mental health, and in particular, rewiring your brain when you're in nature. So it's going to be quite an interesting conversation tomorrow. On Thursday, we have Melissa Grew, who is an amazing, well, she calls herself a biographer, natural biographer, but she's a master wildlife photographer as well. And she'll be talking about how that makes her feel and what she does, basically. And next Monday, we got Alison Steadman. For those in the UK will know that she's a national treasure and an actress, and she's talking about how nature makes her feel. And on Tuesday, the 22nd of December, the last one before Christmas, we've got a guy called Dave Goulson, who is a professor in studies insects and in particular bumblebees. So it could be quite dovetail with you, quite a good dovetail. And the other thing to say is that in January, we have a week from the 11th, I think, of January for 4 days, when we're going to be talking to young people. A young person every night will be interviewed by the rising star known as Maya Bambrick, who's with us tonight. She'll be interviewing young people and talking to them about conservation and what they do and what they want to do in the future. So that should be very interesting. I'm taking a break. If I might even be assisting her, policing the room. So
you might be out of a job, Dave.
I think so, actually. So that's coming. So at this point, I want to thank you, Joel, for coming back after your first time. This has been even better. The first time was great, but this has been even better. It's been amazing learning about the work you do and what we can do to make our gardens wildlife havens. And I'm sure there's going to be a ton of questions regarding that. So thank you very much for your time, Joel.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, and I hope it's inspired a few people. And yeah, if it just creates another pond or another sanctuary for birds, then I've done my job. My work here is done. But if any of you want to follow what I do, I have got a YouTube channel, Wild Your Garden with Joel Ashton, and of course my book Wild Your Garden, for those of you that are looking for any inspiration. It's got a full plant list of how you can, what to plant, where to plant, trees, shrubs, herbaceous perennials, how to make a wildlife pond, and everything else. And I've got some how-to videos on YouTube as well, which yes, should hopefully help many more people that I could possibly visit in a 12-month period.
Fantastic. And Zoomers, thank you very much, and I hope to see you all soon, and keep looking up.